Before we start, I would want you to hit that red subscribe button so that you never miss out on any of our videos. 3. John Gill. John Gill was a young boy who was about to turn 8 when he was murdered at the end of 1888. That winter, while the Ripper was on his killing spree down in the capital city, Gill was slain by an unknown killer. At the time, many people believed Gill's murder was connected to the Ripper killings because of the timing and the brutality. Gill went missing on December 27th in Bradford, a town about 150 miles, 241 kilometers, north of London. 2 days later, his body was found in a stable near his house. The body was laid out in the young boy's clothes, and the crime scene was beyond horrific. Gill's arms, legs, and ears had been cut off. His internal organs were removed and placed on top of him. And sickeningly, his shoes were found inside his chest cavity. Bradford police sought help from a skilled chemist who carefully examined the body and the area around it. He found some clues using a microscope. It turned out the boy had eaten a currant-filled bun before he died, perhaps as a bribe. The body was wrapped in a newspaper from Liverpool. However, the name and address on it didn't lead them anywhere. The police eventually arrested a local man in connection with the murder, but there wasn't enough evidence, so he was never prosecuted. No one else was ever charged in Gill's murder either. 2. Eliza Grimwood. Critics are everywhere, right? Even famous writers face their fair share of negative opinions. Take Charles Dickens, for example. When he released his novel Oliver Twist, many critics were particularly disturbed by the murder of Nancy. This scene was considered too intense by many readers. It was very often excluded from stage adaptations. But Dickens didn't pull the grisly scene out of thin air. In fact, he based Nancy's murder on the real-life killing of a woman named Eliza Grimwood. On May 26, 1838, Eliza's cousin discovered her lifeless body in her home in the Wellington Terrace area of London. The murder was just as awful as the one depicted in Dickens's book. Eliza had been brutally attacked, her throat slashed, and her body covered in wounds. There was so much blood that it indicated she'd had a fierce struggle with her assailant. The room was nearly completely covered in blood, too. In the end, multiple deep stab wounds were documented during the post-mortem examination. And yet, despite having a few suspects early on, cops lost the trail quickly. Witnesses recalled seeing Eliza with a respectable-looking man the night before, but beyond that, details were few and far between. Sadly, her murder was never solved. In fact, it might have been lost to history had it not been for Dickens's use of the storyline in his iconic literary masterpiece. There are two peculiar aspects to this case. One theory from that time proposed Eliza may have been a victim of a hired hit squad. The squad, the far-fetched theory went, was employed by newspapers to create sensational stories on slow news days. Another intriguing footnote is that the killer may have struck again in a very different way 3 decades later. This time, the story goes, the killer targeted Dickens himself. The author had a great fondness for the scene in Oliver Twist, you see. He would regularly perform it on stage with great passion, but there was so much fire in his performance that Dickens's friends believed it affected his health. When he suffered a deadly stroke in 1870, his closest friends swore it was these performances that brought on the fatal blow. 1. Harriet Boswell. Historians occasionally group Harriet Boswell's tragic death with others perpetrated by Jack the Ripper, but if that's true, Jack took a long break from killing after he murdered her. On Christmas morning in 1872, Harriet was killed in London. The sequence of events that led to her awful demise started on Christmas Eve. That night, she went to the city's Alhambra dance hall. Once there, she encountered a well-dressed foreign man. Many who witnessed the two of them together later told cops they believed him to be German. Regardless, nobody knew his identity. When she decided to go home with him later that night, she inadvertently sealed her fate. The following morning, Harriet's landlady discovered her lifeless body with multiple cuts on her throat. Despite the gruesome scene, Harriet had a peaceful expression on her face, according to the police. Soon, detectives launched a full investigation for justice. In just a few days, it led cops to a German man named Gottfried Hessel. A doctor, Hessel was in London for a few days while preparing to travel to the Western Hemisphere. But that's where things turned cold. In those days, forensic science was not advanced as it is now. To make matters worse, the police lacked sufficient evidence to accuse the upstanding doctor. Dr. Hessel was eventually cleared due to his good character and alibi. The alibi in question? It was provided by hotel neighbors who claimed they saw his boots placed outside his hotel room. The boots supposedly indicated he couldn't have left the establishment to commit the murder. But curiously, the hotel maid testified she had washed several bloodied handkerchiefs for him on the night after the murder. That may seem suspicious to you, but not to London cops. After a brief interrogation, Dr. Hessel was released. After he was let loose, London newspapers criticized the police for suspecting such an upstanding citizen of committing a terrible crime. Gradually, the murder faded from the headlines. In the years after, no one else was ever arrested in connection with Harriet Buswell's tragic case. This brings us to the end of our video. I hope you enjoyed it. Hit like if you did, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss any of our videos in the future. Also, watch the 2 videos that are on your screen because I'm sure you'll love them. With that, I'll see you in the next video.